we are going to finish off our pot roast dinner that we have cooking in the oven with some mashed potatoes, pot roast carrots, and creamed kale. And then we are going to bake up some sourdough mini bowls to have with our dinner tonight. So let's start by getting these all kind of prepped out. So last night we prepped up our mini bowls, and these are all savory bowls. For it, we've got a garlic and 3 cheese, a everything bagel, cheddar and green onions, Italian herbs and cheese, and a black pepper and Parmesan. And oregano. So we have a lot of great savory little mini sourdough bowls that we're gonna bake up here. I find that it's easier if I go through and score them all and then kind of just do it like, a little factory line and pop it up. Get the next ones out and out. So this looks like it's gonna be my 3 cheese. This next one, I can typically tell when I have it scored, when it pops open, you can see what our delicious inclusions are in here. This one is a Parmesan one. I think that might be an Italian herbs and cheese. Go. Get our next one. But this is just the same, it's a sourdough loaf. It's my big loaf that I divided up into 6 kind of mini sourdough bowls, which are honestly probably perfect for like 2 people because they're just like a great little size. Okay, let's do these first 3 so I have some room. Put this right over here. I'll slide these guys in. They're nice and hot, so I preheat them in the oven at 500 degrees for the last, 45 minutes or so. Slide this guy in there, make sure he's snug as a bug in a rug. There we go. Let me make sure I put my little lids back on. They're nice and hot, so make sure you use an oven mitt. But these always just make like the cutest little sourdoughs. And it's fun to use my little individual kind of mini Dutch ovens. Here we go. Let's get our next 3 out and scored, and then we'll bake these up in the oven. This is my Italian herbs and cheese because I can tell from all the Italian spices. This is the everything bagel loaf. And let's pop this last one out here. And this looks like oregano, black pepper, and Parmesan cheese. Okay, and then just scrape a little bit of the flour. Let's score these up. I'm doing just a simple kind of crisscross on these because I just find with them so little, just keeping it simple works. But you can, if you want to get in there, you can actually do like some detail because you have actually a pretty good amount of space. Okay, now that we've got this next batch up, remove these. Slide these guys in. Now, you could individually put each one in the oven, but I find it's easier to transfer everything if you put it on a baking sheet. And our next one. And then the final one.
And you have a question. You have to preheat them?
Yes. Preheating them allows to create almost like this just lovely baking oven environment, and it allows you to trap in that moisture. And I preheated them at 500 degrees for about 30 to 40 minutes, so they're nice and toasty hot. And again, it just creates this perfect little, bread environment that traps the moisture in when it bakes. And then you bake the last bit. For these, we do about 13 minutes at 450 for the second baked part, with the lid off to give you that nice golden crust. But this tray is heavy. So slide these guys in there, 500 degrees, and then we're gonna bake for 20 minutes with the lid on. Then we'll take the lid off for the final 13 minutes of bake time. But let's get working on our next part of our dinner. We're gonna whip up some mashed potatoes. We're gonna put some carrots and parsnips in for our pasta pot roast veggies, because I love carrots cooked in the pot roast juices. And we're gonna make some cream kale. So I've got some carrots here that we're gonna peel and then give them a nice kind of, quarter, cut them up a little bit. I don't think I'm gonna necessarily use all of them. And then I have some parsnips, which if you've never had a parsnip before, they look kind of like a white carrot, but they have this nice lemony kind of flavor to them. So they're lovely. And they're, just a fun, different root vegetable to change it up. Go. And peel off this whole outer bit of it, because again, you want to have that peeled so there's not a woody, chewy texture to the outside of your carrot. And this is going to allow it to soak up some more juices and really give you that nice pot roast flavor to the carrots. Now earlier today, around 5:30, I prepped my pot roast up and put it in the oven to cook at 300. What I did is I sauteed up one whole onion first, and then I took my chuck roast and I cut it into 6 sections, so we have nice 6 big pieces. And then I seasoned them with garlic, salt, and pepper, and I seared them off in my pan, my Dutch oven. And then I tucked all the onions around them, added a little beef broth and a little bit of kitchen bouquet to the base of it, and it's just been cooking in this lovely flavored, delicious bath, I should say. Okay, let's get our little parsnip ones out. I don't ever put my carrots in when I'm doing my pot roast until, at least 30 minutes to an hour before I serve it, because I don't like my carrots to get mushy. And so keeping them out until like 30 minutes minimum out to an hour out allows them to keep their firmness to it, but still get soft. So I'm gonna cut some of these thicker ones in half. Quarter this guy because he's pretty thick. And then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take my pot roast out of the oven, and we're gonna tuck these guys into the pot roast under the juices, and they'll soak up all of that deliciousness while the pot roast finishes off cooking. Here's our carrots, and then we have our parsnips. Now I don't ever go too heavy on the parsnips because they do give you somewhat of that lemony flavor into it, but just adding 2 is a perfect amount. I feel like gives it 2 without changing the overall broth of your pot roast. Cut these guys up. I will say they look like a carrot, but they're kind of textured when you cut them up. Feels more spongy like a sweet potato is. It's almost that kind of fibrous, drier bit to it. Okay, cut that guy a little big. Now I'm gonna reach into my oven here, and let me grab my pot holders. We'll take our pot roast out. And we'll get these carrots cooking and parsnips. Beautiful. Look at that gorgeous. And grab some tongs. And this is where I flip my meat over so that it gets the part that has been cooking up gets nice and even tender and juicy. So toss them all over, but you can just see how tender this meat is. It's practically falling apart when I grab it. Beautiful. And then we're gonna tuck after I've got them all flipped over, and this is just to prevent that top part from drying out, because I don't have it completely submerged in the juices, because I like it to be a thicker kind of stew-based juices. I'll pop these parsnips in, make sure they're again, they're under, and I used about 2 cups of beef broth in here with it, so you've got that natural fat too from the pot roast or the chuck roast. So we'll just slide these guys underneath so they can soak up that flavor. You want to make sure you get them all kind of coated. Beautiful. Perfect. And the pot roast, it's simple in the seasoning. You know, pepper, garlic. I did use 3 bay leaves as well. And then that beef bouillon and kitchen bouquet, which is a browning seasoning, but it's just a lovely kind of sauce base that has just very nice, rich flavors to it. Okay, we've got our carrots and everything. Tuck that back in here. And we'll let that finish cooking off at 300 degrees for this. Now let's work on our potatoes. I'm gonna start turning up my water a little bit higher here, and we'll get these thrown in. I've got a couple russet potatoes. I'm not sure if I'm gonna use them all, but I'll have them here. I'm going to cut them a little bit smaller so that they'll cook up faster. If you leave them bigger, then they'll take longer, and then you risk also them kind of disintegrating before the middle gets cooked through. So we'll dice them up small, and then we're gonna whip these into just a really light, fluffy mashed potato. Now, I'm using russet because I think russets make the fluffiest mashed potatoes because they're not a super starchy, like sticky potato or a waxy potato. Yukon Golds make really thick mashed potatoes that are more sticky, which I prefer to use Yukon Golds in soups and what, but for mashed potatoes, russets is where it's at because they are lighter, not as dense, and just fluff up a little bit nicer. But the only thing you have to really watch yourself as is when you're boiling them, you can't forget about them and overboil them, or they kind of just completely disintegrate. So we're gonna peel off the skin because this is not one where you can keep the skin on. That skin is tough and chewy. It's not a tender skin like a Yukon Gold or a red potato. So definitely peel your russets. There we go. And I'm gonna start with 4, because I don't think we'll actually need our 5th potato, because these are really big potatoes. And I lost one of my big mashed potatoes eater tonight because Torrin decided to spend the night at his grandparents'. They always like to watch the football games together. They went to a football game today. So I was like, oh, my big mashed potato eater is gone. Here we go. So now we're gonna cube these up nice and small so that they cook up faster. You don't wanna leave them too big because again, bigger will take longer. Smaller will cook faster. And you want to make sure you cut them up evenly because if you ever have a problem of getting lumpy mashed potatoes, it's because your potatoes were undercooked, and that can happen when you have some that are a lot bigger than others. So make sure you try to cut them up all in the same size, and then throw them in there. And I always check when I'm checking for my doneness of my potatoes, I always check the largest potato I can fish out, because if that one is able to smush a fork through, then you know it's gonna be ready. So I'm kind of cubing up small, almost like a home fry, that way they can just cook up a little bit faster. Gonna whip these guys up, because nothing is better than a fresh batch of mashed potatoes. Mashed potatoes is one of those foods that I just don't think holds well the next day. You've got to have it fresh. It's not a reheatable one, just because the starch in it makes it get really, like, I want to say like chunky. There we go. And then we're going to drop these in just a second for it. And then we'll work on our creamed kale. We will take our lids off of our sourdough here, and then we will make a little bit of a gravy to go on our mashed potatoes using some of our meat drippings from our pot roast. So, good stuff coming. I'm excited though with our sourdough ones because having lots of different inclusions in them, I feel like I can mix and match and see how they are. I've been doing a lot of plain ones recently, so it's fun to change it up a little bit. I'll see what my kids' favorite one are as well. Typically, it's the funniest thing though, Lena, outside of the everything bagel sourdough loaf, she always goes with the plain is the best. And I have to say, you know, there is something special about it, just the basic traditional sourdough loaf. It's just so good. Okay, let's get these guys in here cooking nice and hot. I'm gonna slide these guys in. Here we go. And again, these are our russet potatoes, all diced up. I did them nice and small so they'll cook up faster than leaving them in a bigger cut. There we go. And then I dropped one. I'm gonna get rid of that. And let's give these a quick stir. There we go. I always just stir my potatoes when I first put them in so that none of them stick to the bottom of my pot. And if you want even fluffier mashed potatoes, if you have time, give them a good rinse to take out some of that extra starch, because the starch is what sticks them together. So if you do a quick rinse or pour off the top of it, you can get an even like fluffier mashed potato. Okay, while we are waiting for those to boil up, let's start on our creamed kale. I am going to grab a little bit of olive oil because I realized I forgot that. Realized I put seasonings in my wet cabinet.
You have a question? Do you save leftovers?
If I have leftovers, I send them to my parents' house because I cook all of their meals. So we had our chicken Madeira at lunch, and I sent over the leftovers for my mom to have for dinner tonight. And then I always make them little like sourdough loaves or whatnot. So I always try to cook enough for us to have dinner and then for my parents to have. So it's essentially cooking for 9 people every meal, which is fun. It can take a hot minute on there. The hardest thing for me is not cooking for large people. It's cooking for small groups because I'm just so used to cooking for big groups. I remember when my husband, when we were dating in college, and I would cook up dinner, and we'd have like leftovers for days because I would always just overcook. Here. Now that our potatoes have a chance to set, as you see on the top of our water is nice and cloudy. That is starchy water. So I always like to just pour that top layer off, and it allows my mashed potatoes to get a little bit more fluffy. There we go. And then, so I have that off, and then let me grab a paper towel to also blot it just a smidge. And this is just gonna give you the fluffiest mashed potatoes. It's something where you don't have to do a lot of extra work, but it does make it turn out better. And I always get the compliment from people that I have the best mashed potatoes. And I think part of it is the fact that I also use butter and cream, and mashed potatoes are never diet mashed potatoes in my house. They're rich and creamy and delicious. So we've got our oil heating up here. We're gonna add in about, I wanna say 1.5 teaspoons of garlic. You can use fresh garlic if you have it. I used up all of mine today, so I need to grab some more at the store. There we go. We're gonna just saute this up I'm gonna turn it down now to about a 5. Hit it in the oil for about a minute. Don't go too long or you're gonna go from nice and like golden brown to burnt. Garlic is more of a delicate, spice that when you saute it up, it burns pretty quickly. And part of that is because it's minced so small. And then we've got our kale.
And I'm gonna take some of this out and I'm gonna chop it a little bit more. It's already fairly chopped, but you get these really long pieces that can make it a little bit challenging to eat if it's too long. And then we're gonna add this in batches, but creamed kale is so delicious. Okay. Now what I like to do is I always saute up my kale and whatnot, and then I add my cream at the very end. I don't do it too early in the cooking process with the cream, otherwise it will evaporate away and then you're just constantly adding more and more. So I'm gonna turn this down to about a 3. And we're gonna let this saute. Now, kale has a little bit more of a body than spinach, it will shrink a little bit, and so we'll add a little bit more, but it's not like spinach where you can have this huge overpiling thing, and then when you're done, it's like this tiny little bowl. Let's get these guys in here. Kind of coat them up. I'm going to put a smidge, we'll do a little bit of butter, kind of go with that. I have about a teaspoon and a half, 2 teaspoons of oil. So I'm going to use a little bit of butter now, just about, a teaspoon and a half of butter. Adds just a little bit of a nicer flavor to it. We're going to mix it in here and we'll let it melt up. There we go. Just kind of make sure you coat every part of your kale with it, because if you don't cook your kale long enough, it's going to be very bitter. It's one of those ones that you need to, if you're going to have a kale salad, you need to marinate it to get some of that bitterness out, but with cooking it, you need to kind of cook it until it gets a kind of a dark green, more tender in there. Otherwise, it has just that bitter flavor. There we go. Got these guys all kind of coated up. Let that simmer. I'm going to chop up a little bit more, but I want to give my potatoes a little bit of a stir here. There we go. And then just sprinkle in a smidge, because I'm going to reserve a little bit of this water to use in my gravy. Because the drippings for our beef things is really fatty, and I don't like to use all of that as just the base, because it will make my like gravy really oily. So we're going to use a little bit of this with some beef bouillon as well. Okay, let's get our next handful here chopped up, and I'll add it in. I tend to find it's easier just to add your kale in batches, same with spinach, instead of just trying to add it all in at one time, because it does shrink down. Take out some of the really big, thicker stalks for this. And then we're going to grate up some Parmesan cheese, because we're going to add a little bit of Parmesan cheese to our creamed kale. Coat this up. Make sure you coat all of your leaves with that lovely little bit of that butter and oil mixture. Perfect. And we'll let that kind of wilt and get nice and tender. I'm going to just clear this off, because we're going to grate some of our Parmesan cheese to add to our things. I find that freshly grated incorporates a little bit better into the sauce than using like pre-grated, but you can really, either one works. Just freshly grated is a little bit smoother. So we're gonna grate it, and then I'll dump it in there. I want about around 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup, because we have a good amount in here. So gotta grate this up. I always say, I'm like, oh, I need to get one of those, the ones where you go to the restaurant and the waiter is just cranking it there. I've been to a couple where they've had one of these, and I'm like, ugh, that's a lot more work. There we go. So getting there, that's almost 1/4. have pine nuts. Pine nuts also are delicious in this. If you add in just like, you know, 1/4 of a cup or 2 to 3 tablespoons of pine nuts, adds a nice little crunch to it. Okay. I think that's good. Let me give this a quick toss. Then our sourdough is ready for us to take the lids off, and then it's a 13-minute countdown to our final bit of our dinner tonight. Okay. This one, you've got to have muscles for this. This probably weighs like 25 or 30 pounds. It's heavy. Okay. Now we're taking off our lids. You can see they all have this just beautiful pop to it. They're just about as good as I could divide them up evenly. So looks like beautiful. That is the cheddar cheese and green onion. Beautiful. These all popped up gorgeous, how much they spread out. Now, these bake up a little bit different than my big bowls. My big bowls I bake for 20 minutes at 450. These I bake for about 13 minutes at 450 because they don't need quite as much time because they're not as big. And if you bake them for too long, then they get a little bit more crusty. So bring your oven temperature down from 500 to 450. And then we'll do good old 13 minutes. And that's the key I found. 13 is the best. I first tried with 10, it wasn't enough, and then I finally 13. Okay. Potatoes are getting.
You have a question? Did you make those on stream?
Yes, we made those last night on our late night stream. We prepped up those. I prepped up also a really big sourdough bowl with a strawberry jam swirl in it. And then we also prepped up some peanut butter bars last night for it. Here we go. You see how much kale it's already shrunk down from how big it was? I think I might add just a smidge more. Just leave that. Break a couple of those leaves apart. And then I'm gonna check my potatoes and see where their tenderness is at. Once we add our cream in, we'll add our Parmesan cheese, but you don't want to put it in too prematurely or you're gonna have all of the liquid in your cream reduce out and your Parmesan stick to the bottom of the pan. Okay, let's check these potatoes. I'm gonna grab a fork. And ideally in here you want to fish around and find a good sized potato, and then always try to find, here this guy looks pretty big, and if your fork can slide through it pretty easily just like that, you know your potatoes are ready to mash up. So these are just perfect. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to reserve a little bit of this starchy water to make our gravy. Now, think of using potato water is very similar to using like starchy pasta water. This will just help that gravy add a nice little velvety texture to it. And it will also help dissolve that beef bouillon that I'm going to add in with the meat drippings from our pot roast. There we go. Ladle it off here. I only need about a cup because we'll have the drippings in there. We don't need so much for our gravy. And then we're going to strain these. Let me give our kale a quick toss. There we go. It's getting there. Now, if you were to sub out and do spinach instead of kale, it will cook in like 1/3 of the time. Kale needs a little bit more. Strain these. Shake out our excess liquid. And then I put them right back into my pan because since it's an all metal pan, I can whip up my mashed potatoes in them. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put in our butter and we're gonna let our butter melt and our cream heat up before we whip it. That just helps give you a fluffier mashed potato as well. Since we only used 4 mashed potatoes, I'm not gonna use quite a whole stick. 5 I typically use a whole stick in, but this one I'm gonna use about 3/4 of a stick. Use room temperature butter instead of cold. It melts better and it just helps keep the potatoes fluffy. And then let me grab my cream. And we're gonna do a drizzle around of the cream. We'll let it warm up before we fluff it. Now, depending on how starchy your potatoes are is whether you're gonna need a bit more cream or not. I always go by the texture when I'm whipping them, so it's hard to do an exact measurement. And then a couple sprinkles of salt. We're gonna let that sit for a minute or two, warm all of those up, and then we'll whip those. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, now I'm gonna turn this down nice and low so it's not too high, and we can add in our cream here for our creamed kale. And it's gonna be, you know, between 1/4 of a cup and 1/3 of a cup. I don't flood it too much. I always add just a little bit more as it starts to kind of cook up because I don't want to waste all of my cream, and you don't need it to be drenched in it to get all of that really great flavor. So we're gonna keep it nice and low and let it simmer in here. And then what I do, if you find any big stalks of kale, and if you're using like the like where you rip it off from the stalk, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're using the pre-cut up one, just take those out because those never get tender and are always more bitter. There we go. Okay. Keeping it low. Let me pat these all down so they can kind of soak up on there. We'll add a little bit more in just a bit, but I always start with little by little and let it kind of move up here. Okay, let's get our mashed potatoes, get their first whip in. Let me grab my hand mixer here. And then we'll get our pot roast out. We'll get some of our meat drippings to start making our gravy. Now, I can whip them straight in here because this is an all metal pan. If you have a non-stick pan, do not whip your mashed potatoes in there. I'm going to turn it up. We're going to whip it around until we have this really nice, fluffy mashed potato. Perfect. Now I'm going to let it sit for a little bit. Let it again kind of marry together, and then I'll taste it and we'll whip it one more time. I always let it sit for a little bit because that lets me know if I need to add in any more liquid or not. Okay, let me get our pot roast out. Where's my pot holders? That way we can take some of those meat drippings. Hot and steamy. Beautiful. So we've got our beautiful pot roast here. You can see our carrots and our parsnips in there. They should be nice, tender, but still have a little bit of firmness to them. So they're, you know what I mean, but enough to be able to like break through them just like that, you see? So tender enough, but still have their form, which is my favorite part. Okay, let's get a little bit of these meat drippings here. I'm gonna get a pan to cook up our gravy in. Let me get our medium-sized one.
You got a question? What pans do you use?
So I use, depending on what cooking I'm doing, I have my hex clad for my non-stick. For my metal pans, I have all clad, and then my Dutch ovens, I have a mixture of Le Creuset and some Staub. All of them have been gifted to me throughout the years as wedding presents or birthday presents or Christmas presents. So I have a good collection. I've had my all clad for almost 16, 17 years now because they were a wedding present, and I absolutely love them. They're great basic metal pans for cooking with all sorts of things. And then I have to say I do love my Hexclag as the non-stick. I have had these for about 2 years and I have not scratched them. So that to me is a win-win. Okay, we're gonna melt about a tablespoon of butter in here, maybe that's a little bit more, to make the base of our gravy. We're gonna start with a roux, and then we will add in some flour. That's our roux, butter and flour cooked. And we'll add in our starchy potato water with our beef bouillon and our meat dripping. So let me grab my beef bouillon out of the fridge. Now I used about 2 cups of of water and a scoop of beef bouillon in the base of my pot roast, but it's now full of lots of delicious flavors. But instead of using all the drippings, because there is a lot of fat in that drippings and you don't want to use it all just in your gravy because it will make you have a really greasy gravy that separates fairly easily, I'm going to mix it with some of this starchy potato water. But I'm going to dissolve my beef bouillon in it. That way it is all mixed up so I can put it in our gravy. And then let me grab my ladle here. And I'm just going to ladle in some of my meat drippings into this base just to make it a little bit easier. This Dutch oven's hot, so I want to make sure I can collect it. But you see how there is a good amount of fat in there, so I'm going to try to pour a little bit of that fat off and just get that delicious drippings down below. I used to have like a turkey baster, and that's great for sucking up those good juices under there. But one of my kids has used it for some craft project or another. It's crazy where sometimes I find my kitchen stuff. Or all of my scissors, they all go missing. There we go. So I'm gonna grab there. That should be good. So we added in a good amount of our drippings in there that have a lot of flavor. Okay, I'm gonna turn this guy down to a low. We're gonna add in our flour here. Let me grab it real quick. And we're gonna whisk it together to make our roux, which is the base for our gravy. So I'm gonna add in about a tablespoon of flour. I like to do equal parts butter and flour for our base. And then we're gonna whisk it in. Let's see, I think I need a little bit more flour. And you're gonna have this just nice kind of thick paste to it. And this is going to make your gravy stick, like give it its thickness to it. And we're gonna whisk it here. This should be good. We're gonna give it a good, heat for just a second here. And then we're gonna add in our liquid part for it. Put it down. But let me toss, before we start our liquid base, I'm gonna toss our creamed kale here. It's getting nice and hot. We're gonna add our Parmesan cheese in here in just a second. Okay. So here is our meat drippings with our beef bouillon base. We're going to do a little at a time and kind of incorporate it in here. Here we go. You don't want to just dump a whole bunch in. With gravy, you got to go slow and incorporate it in until you get to the right consistency. It will start out thicker, and then you'll get it thinner and thinner by adding more and more liquid. There we go. Perfect, we're getting there. And just swirling it around. You can see how we've got to this nice, lovely base. And then we're gonna go grab our sourdoughs out of our oven here in just a second. Now with this, and then I'm gonna turn this all the way down so that it doesn't cook off too much. And then let's clear this out of the way, and we're gonna grab our sourdough little mini bowls here. And they are looking gorgeous. Again, here's my workout for the day. Pump these up, they're nice and hot and toasty. Now, we want to get them out of our, let me get my little things, our little Dutch oven so that they stop cooking on the bottom, because they do continue to cook in there, because Dutch ovens hold the heat for a good amount of time. So I'm going to slide this back so I can put it on my things here. There we go. Now let's take these guys out. Perfect. Gorgeous. So that one looks like it's my 3 cheese sourdough. There we go. We'll get all of these out and then I'll go over them, because you probably hear lots of crinkling. But this just is a good base as our starter base, and then we added all of these spices and cheeses to them in our inclusion, so they're just going to be wonderful. Here we go. And again, just taking them off. Look how that beautiful golden brown on the bottom, so they're not overdone. Okay, let me get these out of the way, and then we're gonna go over our base thing. There we go. Some of my parchment paper. Okay. So, for our sourdough ones, there was definitely ones I know right away. So this is our cheddar cheese and green onions. This is our mozzarella and pepperoni with Italian seasoning. This is our Italian herbs and cheese, where we also coated the outside with Italian spices. Our everything bagel one, where we swirled everything bagel seasoning inside and crusted the whole outside. This is our 3 cheese with garlic salt. And this is our Parmesan, black pepper, and oregano things. All have that base loaf to it, that base traditional for it, but it's just delicious. Okay, let's finish up here, because we're gonna be about ready to serve up. Let's finish up our kale. We have on low. I'm gonna add in our Parmesan, our freshly grated Parmesan. We're gonna let that melt up, and then I'll add in my last little bit of cream, and then we'll add in some garlic salt to season it up. Beautiful. And then our last bit, you don't need a whole lot of cream again to give you all of that creamy flavor. You just wanna cook it nice and slow to thicken it up and really coat each one. And then let's add in our garlic salt. Good shake over, should be all you need, because again, that Parmesan cheese is going to add a little bit of saltiness as well. Okay, let's check out here. We've got our beautiful pot roast. I'm going to flip each one over to really rehydrate those bottom pieces, or those top parts, with that residual juicy. But just look how tender it is. It just falls apart, just breaks apart. Oh, it's going to be so good, guys. And then I'll do our last little whip of our mashed potatoes here. Let me get a quick taste, see if I need to add anything else. I think I'm gonna add a splash more cream and a little bit of salt. I always say you wanna let them sit for just a second to see exactly where you are. I'm gonna add about a tablespoon more whipping cream, and then another pinch of salt. Let's whip these one more time. And then we'll be ready to serve. beautiful. They're nice and fluffy, and wonderful. And the nice thing about also doing it in your pan is it keeps them nice and warm and delicious. But just look how we've got this light, fluffy mashed potato. Just wonderful. They're going to be beautiful with our dinner today. Let's finish up our gravy. Add these last little bits in here. It has some of our meat drippings in it. And then let me have a quick taste. Delicious, don't need to add anything to it. Okay. And then let me taste our kale. Always gotta taste a little bit of everything. Delicious. So creamy, but it doesn't have to be drenched in it. Let's get ready to serve up our dinner. I'm gonna move this guy over here. So we've got our mini bowls and we can serve up right here since we've got pretty much everything in this area. Say, quite the little feast tonight. Okay, let me grab a plate. And make sure I have a little bit of everything. Okay, let's start with our creamy mashed potatoes made from russet potatoes, butter, cream, and salt, whipped until they're just nice and fluffy, and the russets give you the fluffiest. This is our tender roast beef that has been cooking for the last 3.5 hours. It's a chuck roast that we sauteed up with onions and cooked in a lovely broth. I'm fishing out our carrots and our parsnips that we put in that last 30 minutes in those juices to really give up that wonderful flavor. And we have a nice serving of our creamed kale with some Parmesan cheese and garlic salt. And then of course, the icing on the cake, you've got our beautiful gravy that we'll put over both our mashed potatoes and our pot roast. And then of course we will serve this up with our nice little bevy of mini sourdough bowls. Again, we've got an everything bagel, Italian herbs and cheese, pepperoni and mozzarella, green onions and cheddar. This is our triple cheddar and garlic salt, and our Parmesan, oregano, and black pepper. Well guys, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page, search for what we made, and you can watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. So I've got my hex-clad pans, my all-clad pans, my Dutch ovens, knives, cutting boards, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.